aliens. You explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved.
I mean, the only thing we haven't had to deal with is like the asteroid, you know, or the aliens.
The high-flying assets and some of the really great things that have been achieved.
What's even more astonishing to me is the Vatican's secret plan for welcoming in an alien god with a small g. We'll be right back.
Because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the Russians have engaged.
When really it's a lot more than that.
So recently, I guess it was in October, astronomers spotted what they say could be the first interstellar asteroid. You see it there, kind of that strange shape from beyond the solar system. What do you see when you look at that?
Well, Ms. Burnett, I have to admit to you, when I ran this program, I was fundamentally looking at, my colleagues looking at two things.
Yeah.
What is it and how does it work? We have deliberately stayed away from going down the rabbit hole of who's behind the wheel and what are their intentions.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have a lot of feelings towards that and are very emotional about that. And what I wanted to do was to allow the data to speak for itself and then use that data to inform leadership, senior DoD leadership, about the potential threat that these type of technologies pose to national security, especially over any type of controlled airspace that we might have. So I'm not trying to be evasive in any way or vague with your answer, but
yeah. Well,
I think there's a lot of possibilities.
Look, and I know you think it's important. I know you think that the government didn't take the threat seriously enough. So let me just ask you point blank the question. Do you believe that life from somewhere else, while you ran this program, came here, visited, observed?
I will tell you unequivocally that through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
So I know you're being clear, but I mean, the answer is yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the government. Obviously, I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
Everything I see has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the Russians have engaged in.
If this leaks out to the American public, society could collapse. It could just get hysterical and simply collapse. So they kept it a secret.
The infant Adolf was baptized and brought up as a Catholic.
He'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
It's pretty clear you won't admit that the Russians have engaged.
Many of the top leaders, including Hitler himself, were members of the Vril Society.
And legend had it that the vril of a child was the most concentrated and most powerful.
They were seen as being gateways between the astral and the material world in a way that adults were not. So consequently, they were ideal victims for human sacrifice. The human sacrifice. The human sacrifice. The human sacrifice. Karl Harrer, Anton Drexler, and Dietrich Eckart are three of the most important figures in the transition from the Vril Society to the Nazi Party.
Eckart was considered the darkest of them all and dedicated to Hitler's success.
He did have certain perverse gifts, and not least of which was his ability to train Hitler in the use of, you know, what one might loosely call the power of a human heart and human mind.
Hermann Goering, commander of the Luftwaffe, was said to be a member.
It is virtually certain that he was introduced to it in around 1920, probably by Dietrich Eckart.
Alfred Rosenberg, minister of the Third Reich, probably a member.
Rosenberg believed that the Aryan race was superior to every other, of course, and, you know, he believed that Jesus was not Jewish, but an Aryan.
Rudolf Hess, deputy Führer, another likely member.
Hess believed everything. He used to sleep with magnets under his bed to try and draw off harmful emanations.
Martin Bormann, chief of the Nazi Party Chancellery, also thought to be a member.
Martin Bormann was probably considered the most evil one. He was an avowed and open Satanist. He was quite categorical about his desire to exterminate Christianity as well as Judaism, because he saw Christianity as simply, as he called it, a Jewish perversion.
And the most senior Nazi in the Vril Society, Adolf Hitler himself.
Hitler was, by definition, a dark person, but he took advantage of the dark fellowship of the Vril Society for his own ends.
Hitler is said to have used the frenzy surrounding this occult group to his advantage, manipulating its members.
Not one of the members had an iota of his ruthlessness and, in a sense, intelligence.
Hitler used any means that he could, including the occult fanaticism of the era, as a tool to help his rise to the top.
He saw the whole thing consciously as a means to an end, which was the transformation of Germany and the establishment of himself as its leader.
But he did have some deep occult beliefs of his own.
He believed to considerable extent that occult forces, or whatever one likes to call them, this Vril, had some kind of reality.
Some also believe in the possibility that intergalactic flight could be achieved through the Vril Society.
The Nazis were, at the very last 2 years of the war, working on secret project.
Their ultimate scheme was the Flying Disc Project, a concept based on Vril Society ideas.
We can clearly read in the 1930 pamphlets published by the Vril Society that, yes, there were blueprints. There's even a whole chapter explaining what an ideal spaceship might look to them if the right technology was being used.
Yeah, the Vril saucers were actual blueprints.
I know that devices were built with the technology that the Vril Society was propagating well before the Second World War.
We don't know for sure whether Nazi scientists created flying saucers, but the Vril Society did envision them.
We have a group of wealthy Americans, all involved in the militarization of the paranormal, and they make this contact with this extraterrestrial group called the Nine. So here's the Nine. They're mostly DuPonts, Astors, Forbes, etc. These are the wealthiest families in the United States at the time, blue blood Americans with long pedigrees going back to the Mayflower or to the Declaration of Independence in some cases. Representatives of these families were at this bizarre seance. And during this seance, in Maine, they were contacted, according to all the published documentation. I'm not making this stuff up, and I'm not speculating. Puharich himself published this documentation, saying that aliens, a group of 9, contacted the group of 9 who were at this seance and said, "We are 9, you are 9, we're giving you the mission, to help transform life on the planet." And what was their first major contribution was, having to do with the assassination of President Kennedy. One of them is Arthur Young. Some of you may have heard of Arthur Young. He wrote a lot of very well-received books, The Reflexive Universe, The Geometry of Meaning. Michael Payne's boss, right, the boss of Michael Payne, Arthur Young's son-in-law, is none other than General Walter Dornberger. And he's shown here. That's Dornberger over here, and that's Himmler over here. And they all got hats. So these are all guys. So Michael Payne has these direct connections right back to Paperclip, back to the space program. Michael Payne's wife is also named Ruth. She's Ruth Payne. It was Ruth Payne who got Lee Harvey Oswald the job at the Texas School Book Depository, right on the route where he would be able to assassinate the president. That's Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne had visited Arthur Young and her mother-in-law, Ruth Forbes Payne Young, in Philadelphia in September of 1963. She had Marina Oswald, this Russian defector, the wife of Lee Harvey Oswald, and her children living with her in her house. What was she talking about to Arthur Young, I wonder? Did she ever mention the fact that, hey, I got this Russian defector and his wife living with me in Irving, Texas, Lee Oswald? Maybe you heard of him. He was a Marine. He defected to the Soviet Union, wanting to become a Russian citizen. He redefected back to the United States. He did all of this, and the guy's still only 24 years old. Another member of the Nine, of course, was an Astor, as I mentioned, Ava Alice Muriel Astor. So all American aristocracy. We know the CIA was blamed for the Kennedy assassination. We've all heard the stories. What we don't really remember is that the CIA at that time not only was involved in protecting Nazi scientists as much as they could, and other Nazis around the world, Nazi war criminals, involved with the Vatican, as I think we've all heard, really deliberately helped a lot of very famous, very prominent Nazi war criminals escape, giving them Vatican passports, safe houses. Some of the story you've heard already before. But what we don't really realize is the CIA, at the time of the assassination, for instance, was heavily involved with another Nazi organization, the Gehlen organization, which was running agents for the CIA in Eastern Europe and against the Soviet Union. Again, just like in Paperclip, these Nazi scientists were not really working for us.
After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy,
Hitler was a Rothschild.
Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Tel Aviv, Dr. Boaz Almog.
Now, I can do the same thing on this rail, but upside down, because again, this is not magnetic repulsion. So if I take this disc and pin it below the rail, it will just move below the rail. Again, forget everything you know. This is not classical physics.
זה יורד למטה.
I think nighttime would be lovely, but is that a UFO? Amazing. Holy shit. Oh, is that cool?
You can almost hardly look at it.
We've seen them in Mississippi like this, but never like never like.
Whoa!
The connection will come through Nazism. Nazism, it's also connection. Therefore, connection.
And we're back with Paul Hellyer, former Canadian Minister of Defense, to talk about extraterrestrial life forms. Great to have you back.
They come from various places, from different star systems. The Pleiades and Reta Reticula, that there are actually extraterrestrials who live on a planet called Andromeda, which is one of the moons of Saturn, and that there are others on Venus and some on Mars, and that they may be interacting between themselves. I suspect that they are, because there is what is called a federation of these people, the tall whites, who are actually working with the United States Air Force in Nevada. We should work with the benign species, who are the vast majority, and work together and rely largely on them, of course, and cooperate so that we would be contributing something at the same time. But I don't think there's any point in us developing a galactic force that would tempt us to go out on our own and get into mischief, which is one of the things I think some of them are concerned about.
There is no Holocaust denial in this. These were the worst, most evil, murdering criminal gang in history. And the thing that makes me angry more than anything else is that so many of them were allowed to escape, including Adolf Hitler. I've been a journalist a very long time.
So
Looked at the information.
I mean, can I just challenge it? So not escaped as a matter of accident, but were allowed to escape.
We're allowed
That's
to
a
escape.
different story altogether.
We're allowed to escape with a huge amount of the money that they'd stolen and raped from Europe, with incredible patents, with shares in companies. They set up almost 700 front companies overseas for when they left.
At Nuremberg, the Allies prosecute leading Nazi officials for these crimes against humanity. Some of the most dangerous war criminals are brought to justice, but not all.
There's a myth about Nazis, and that is that there's these horrible people who committed these terrible crimes, and then after 1945 simply disappeared. Well, that simply isn't true.
The truth is that thousands of former Nazis, some of whom committed atrocities, went to work for the United States government without the public's knowledge. During the war, their crimes ranged from overseeing slave labor camps to sending orphans to their deaths. After the war, they were on the U.S. payroll, either as scientists in America or as intelligence agents in Europe.
The U.S. government was willing to use mass murderers, was willing to protect them from justice, was willing to hide their activities from the American people.
Government documents, declassified in the late 1990s, indicate that many of the former Nazis spying for the U.S. in Europe misrepresented and fabricated intelligence. Some even worked as double agents for the Soviet Union.
When Wernher von Braun was dying of cancer, he asked me to be his spokesperson, to appear on occasions when he was too ill to speak. And I did. And what he asked me to do was to educate decision makers and the public about why we shouldn't be putting weapons in space, why they're a dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, untestable, unworkable idea, and what the alternatives are, how we could be building a cooperative space system. What was most interesting to me was a repetitive sentence that he said to me over and over again during the approximately 4 years that I had the opportunity of working with him, and that was the strategy that was being used to educate the public and decision makers, and the scare tactics, the spin that was being put on a weapons system. And that was how we identify an enemy. The enemy, at first he said, the enemy against whom we're going to build a space-based weapons system that he thought was a ridiculous idea, unnecessary and very dangerous, not to mention too costly, etc. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie. And what I hope is that with the new administration, I hope that this information that's being disclosed will allow the new administration to do what is right, which is to transform the war game into a space game, so that we use the technologies that are available, not just as spin-offs of war technology, but as direct technological applications to building a cooperative space system that will benefit the entire world and that will allow us to communicate with the extraterrestrial cultures that are obviously out there.
You are elected and you learned that the government knew aliens had visited Earth and the public didn't know. Would you want the public, would you sure the public found out?
Well, it depends on what these aliens were like and whether they were Democrats or Republicans.
There have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered, and there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge and have been attempting to conceal this knowledge or not permit it to be widely disseminated.
So who do you think is in control of this knowledge at this point?
I cannot answer that. I cannot answer who are these people, but there's a lot of evidence that points to what I call a clandestine group, people who have some quasi-affiliation with government and use certain government facilities, but operate in a rather very stealth and secret way that is not generally under high-level governmental control as far as we can tell. Yes, there has been ET visitation and may continue to be. There has been craft that have been recovered. There has been a certain amount of reverse engineering that has allowed some of these craft or some components to be duplicated, and that there are humanoids from our planet, Earthlings, who are utilizing some of this equipment in certain ways, and that perhaps a large part of the activity that's classified as UFO activity, abductions and a whole host of this type of activity, may very well not be due to ET activity at all. I would suspect if any is due to ET activity, it's a rather small part, and that a larger portion is due to humanoid type activity, Earthling type activity, in a very clandestine fashion.
sort of instill a fear of...
Well, I will stop short of attaching motivation to this. I don't know the motivation. But if it's normal human motivation, it has to do with power and control and greed and money and so forth. Those type of craft, humongous, very, very large craft, the size, so-called, or reportedly, the size of many football fields, that would be very hard to manufacture, conceal, and operate from an Earth base. It would seem, if that account is true at all, it probably would have to be something beyond this realm.
That it was a triangular craft, silent and hovering, that if you felt a connection to your heart and heard directions in your mind. Now, did you see a UFO?
I did, and the rest of the account, it was unidentified flying object, okay? It's unidentified. I saw something. Now, to answer your question, I'm moving and I'm also going to move my campaign office to Roswell, New Mexico, and another one in Exeter, New Hampshire, okay? And also, you have to keep in mind that Jimmy Carter saw a UFO, and also that more people in this country have seen UFOs and I think approve of George Bush's presidency.
Actually,
and so, wait, we're just getting started here.
No. I mean, we have about 14% of Americans say they have seen UFOs. I want to move.
What was the percentage?
14%.
What was that percentage?
14.
Thank you.
I want to see. I'm going to ask Senator Obama a question in the same line. The 3 astronauts of Apollo 11 who went to the moon back in 1969 all said that they believe there is life beyond Earth. Do you agree?
You know, I don't know, and I don't presume to know. What I know is there is life here on Earth, and that we're not attending to life here on Earth. So as president, those are the people I will be attending to first. There may be some other folks on their way.
Now, they are said to be able to cross galaxies, but people who believe they're out there want to know why aliens want to visit Earth. A group of former U.S. servicemen is convinced extraterrestrials are interfering with nuclear weapons, as RT's Cedric Moon explains.
Let's say there's an attack from where doesn't matter. It could be North Korea, Iran, Pakistan. If that were to happen, nuclear payback wouldn't happen. That's a claim made by the men in this room.
Our missiles began going into what's called a no-go condition or unlaunchable. Essentially, they were disabled.
Detailed in this report, full of court-sanctioned sworn affidavits.
The witnesses have described these craft as disc-shaped or cylindrical-shaped or spherical.
If you think what's being said inside this building is completely ridiculous, you might want to consider something.
My name's Robert Hastings. Thank you for coming.
These are men who might know what may have gone on. They're former Air Force missile launch officers, missile base officers, who say UFO spaceships, flying saucers, make nuclear weapon systems go haywire.
In 1966, according to a launch officer, David Schur, his missiles were temporarily activated just as his security guard was reporting a bright object moving from missile to missile to missile.
10, 9, 8. And it's not just in the United States. Also,
4, 3,
in Russia.
2, 1.
Like a 1982 incident that happened in then Soviet Ukraine.
Given the fact that these incidents have gone on over there, including one incident of their missiles being temporarily activated when a UFO was hovering above the missile base, identical to what occurred here, I think we can rule out that whoever are piloting these craft are either American or Russian.
Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe there's no way to ever know. But if they are right, and an out-of-the-ordinary day is about to unfold, remember the saucers. Cedric Moon, RT, Washington, D.C.
Inside the walls of this castle, an unassuming Jesuit from Argentina
leads the Vatican astronomical research and has recently caused an uproar by opening a debate about aliens.
In a universe so big, huge, I would say, as the one where we live, with 100 billion of galaxies, with each galaxy with 100 billion of stars, probably with many of these stars having planets, it would be possible that our life could evolve as the way we know on Earth.
Father Funes says he is not sure if other forms of life would be more or less intelligent than humans, but he is convinced that the existence of aliens is not a contradiction with the Catholic faith.
I'll tell you what, very few Christians, Protestants or Catholics understand what you're about ready to understand right now. But there are secret plans for welcoming. The Vatican will welcome in this alien from another planet as God. Tell me about that.
Well, Sid, you know, when you look at Bible prophecy and it talks about a one world government and a one world religion, you know, you see how divided the world still is. And, you know, we have to think that something unprecedented is going to occur that would unite the world under one heading like that. Now, Ronald Reagan gave a speech to the United Nations where he said how quickly our differences would be resolved if we were faced with an alien threat from outside this world. I mean, this is in the 80s. He gave this speech in the UN.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. Well, I don't suppose we can wait for some alien race to come down and threaten us, but I think that between us we can bring about that realization. I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, you know, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
This great Catholic astronomer, number one, is operating with something called Project Lucifer. What is that?
Well, up on top of Mount Graham in Arizona, there's an observatory complex that consists of 3 very high-powered telescopes. One is the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. There's a radio telescope, and then there's one called the Large Binocular Telescope. This is the most powerful telescope in the world. In fact, they told us they can get better images of space than the Hubble Space Telescope can. Now, attached to this telescope is an infrared camera named Lucifer, which is really a kind of an odd name for a camera. And you know, from the information that we gathered, this thing was named by the Max Planck Institute and some German astronomers. But the Vatican is part of this conglomerate up there, and they're all working together. Now, what this instrument's used for is astrobiology, for looking for exoplanets, looking for other worlds. And the infrared spectrum is also very useful for seeing things that can't be seen with the naked eye. And many UFO researchers have noted that you can see a lot of ships and entities that you normally can't see.
Tell me about what the Vatican astronomers are telling you, or what others, experts, I mean, you had a research team.
Right.
Tell me a few of the things they're telling you.
Well, first of all, the day that we spent it on Mount Graham, the entire day there, we had the Jesuits speaking to us face to face. We also had systems engineers. It was astonishing, the access that they gave us. And one of the things we found amazing in the use of the Lucifer device and even the other telescopes is how commonly the astronomers spoke of UFOs. We were just taken back by the fact that it was almost a nuisance to them that there are so many.
I have to tell you, UFOs, I mean, I think that's like science fiction, to be quite candid with you. But I told my staff about this interview, and one of the staff members said when he was 12 or 13 years old, he saw a UFO, and they visited him and talked to him. I mean, and that's just a small group of people. And statistics say 1 out of 2 people in America believe in UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And we're hearing now reports all over the world.
When Father Malachi Martin was asked, why is the Vatican, why do they have a presence on Mount Graham? And one of the things we haven't had time to talk about is Mount Graham is sacred to the Apache. It is a stargate through which they've, for centuries, have seen creatures that come, that move back and forth.
Now, this is right in Arizona.
This is in Arizona. And in fact, their creation mythos is that a disc came down and a bearded guy in the disc, who was the father of creation, was what established Mount Graham as a holy mountain. Well, anyway, when Malachi Martin was asked, why is the Vatican on Mount Graham? What are they doing up there? He said that they're using their telescope to watch something. And when he was pressed on the question, he said it's because at the highest levels of the Vatican governance, they know what is approaching the earth, and it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. They're literally watching something with the Lucifer device that is approaching planet Earth now.
And what do you believe they're looking for?
I think that they could be deceived. I think they're watching something and they think it's one thing, and I think it's something else. Lucifer, I think it's Satan. I think Jesus said, I beheld Satan as lightning falling from heaven. He has to do with the power of the air. And of course, you know, when Pope Benedict stepped down not long ago, twice lightning struck the top of the St. Peter's Basilica. And this goes back to their belief system. In Romanism, the belief was that the God would tell you when somebody should step down and when a new king should be elected. It was called augurism, and it's where we take the word inaugural or inauguralism for the placement of a new king.
What have you uncovered from records in the Vatican about aliens? I mean, it blows my mind that they're even researching such a subject as this.
Well, the records in the Vatican go back centuries. Actually, I wrote 2 chapters of history concerning the Vatican's interest in extraterrestrials. They have a whole theology developed around what they call the principle of plenitude, meaning anything that God could do, he would do. So they consider the existence of aliens an inevitable consequence of God's omnipotence. In 2009, the Vatican sponsored an astrobiology conference.
And that means?
That is the study of life in space. Now, what makes that interesting is that we don't really know of any life in space, yet our universities have programs where you can study this. They had the top secular scientists in the world come to Rome for this conference in 2009. We're talking about, atheists, secular scientists, and the sort of topics that they're covering, things like shadow life, exoplanets.
What's an exoplanet?
An exoplanet is a planet that's outside of our solar system.
Okay.
So you have the top scientists in the world gathering in Rome for the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, an audience for the Pope to study life in space.
Just finishing up, this is the Vatican now, a 5-day conference on aliens. Did the Vatican find alien life?
You know what? As sensationalistic as that question sounds, it's really not that far off from what we've seen in the news over these last days.
Now, you as a Roman Catholic priest, you're open to science, is what you're saying, correct?
Without a doubt, not only open, Bill, but we have to respect science in its own field.
How would it change the church's teaching then? Well, if you consider for a moment, if you determine that there is extraterrestrial life there?
Well, one thing would be fascinating would be not only extraterrestrial life, but if it were extraterrestrial intelligent life forms. That would definitely make us go back and say, maybe our understanding of perennial truths needs to be updated. Now, the way we look at it is this. It's not about whether or not God was the creator, but rather how he created.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. We even had the opportunity to go to Mount Graham in Arizona, which is where their Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope, called that, where it's at, where the Vatican's astronomers study the deep space. And in the course of doing that, getting permission through the Arizona State University to go there to meet with their astronomers, the Jesuits who are there, we also got access to top astronomers that work in Rome, including an astronomer by the name of Guy Cosmonalgo. He's one of the top astronomers for the Vatican.
What was the major thing you got from that interview with him?
Oh, well, two major things. One, he says without apology that very soon the nations of the world are going to look to the aliens for their salvation. Now, when you make a comment like that...
Did you just hear what he said?
Caroldo Balducci, who was the spokesman for the Vatican, he was their official mouthpiece concerning the alien presence, not just the reality of aliens on other worlds, but an alien presence that is here on Earth now. You can go to YouTube and watch his shows on Italian television when he spoke for the church and said that the church was using its embassies around the world to compile information, a case study, if you will, on what the aliens are doing on Earth now. So the belief system is deep, regardless of what you or I might make out of it.
Gathered in a schoolyard with about 20 other men, and we saw a bright light appear in the distant western skies, and it got closer and closer, and when it was just above the treetops, it changed color, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it disappeared into the distance. And none of us could ever imagine what it was, and I still don't know what it was.
In 76, he said you'd try and release all information to the public and to scientists about other UFO sightings.
Yes.
Do you think you achieved that?
I'm not sure, but we did release a lot of the information, but I don't know how much was not released.
UFO researchers insist that George Herbert Bush is the key to present-day UFO knowledge.
George Bush Sr., I think, is one of the key presidents when it comes to ufology. He's a very important president because he has always been believed by a lot of researchers to be a guy who knows what's going on. He was former CIA director under President Ford. He was vice president under Ronald Reagan for 8 years, would have gotten briefings on many issues, including UFOs. He was trusted by the military. He was trusted mostly by the intelligence community. In fact, now they've actually named a building at the CIA headquarters after George Bush.
Herbert Walker Bush, when he was in his earlier days, had served as chief of the CIA. Now, some people think in that capacity he was bound to have known about what was going on ufologically at the agency.
If the United States Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either. And I want to know. I want to know. I want to know.
Roswell, New Mexico. It's as quiet and peaceful today as it has been for decades. But on July 8, 1947, that tranquility was shattered by a local newspaper headline. Air Force captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. The story described wreckage of a flying disc found near a place called Corona and was based on a press release written by the public information officer at Roswell Air Base, Lieutenant Walter Hott.
This building here, building number 84, is the building I believe that they brought materials from the Corona crash and stored them in here temporarily.
The chief intelligence officer at the base, Major Jesse Marcel Sr., was sent out to the ranch to collect the crash debris and transport it to the Army Air Force headquarters for examination. In the meantime, newspapers all over the western United States picked up the story. But before Marcel had landed his plane and strange cargo, the Air Force issued a second bulletin.
By the time the B-29 with Jesse Marcel and some of the wreckage got to the headquarters 2 hours after they left in Fort Worth, Texas, the fix was already in to kill the story.
The second press release was far different from the first, saying the wreckage was actually from a weather balloon. Could the Army's top intelligence investigators have committed such a basic blunder, failing to recognize the mundane remains of a weather balloon when they first encountered it? No, says nuclear physicist and part-time UFO researcher Stanton Friedman, who's been investigating the Roswell crash for over a decade. He says that while Marcel was in the air, the Roswell base commander, Brigadier General Roger Ramey, got orders from Washington to cover up the incident.
And what he did was arrange for the wreckage of a weather balloon, the radar reflector on a weather balloon.
And for a while, the saucer saga was forgotten, and might have remained so if Major Marcel hadn't rekindled the fire in 1980. Just before he died, Marcel admitted that the weather balloon story had been fabricated to hide the truth. He told Walter Hott there really was a saucer crash.
He made statements to the effect that it was nothing of this world. It couldn't be bent, torn, cut, pierced, burned. He went through a whole list of them. I said, we just don't have the technology to produce material like I brought in from that ranch.
The government steadfastly maintains that there never was a crash near Roswell. But Friedman contends his research shows there was not just one, but two UFO crashes that day, the result of a spectacular mid-air collision. Which brings us to our close encounter of the third kind. Friedman says wreckage of the second craft landed some 200 miles away from the first. And this time, there were survivors.
When I first came up to the craft, the creatures were laying like this in a line, side by side. And the live one was over here.
Gerald Anderson says he was 5 years old when he and his family came across the unearthly wreckage and bodies.
And my dad was kind of right about here, and he was sitting like this. My Uncle Ted was standing more over here, kind of leaned over like this, and they were talking to this creature.
Anderson's story matches that of others who were in the area at the time. With the help of hypnotherapy, he's been able to remember the encounter with startling detail. His description matches those from people who claim to have seen aliens. 4 feet tall, grayish skin, large eyes, long skinny arms and fingers. Anderson recalls 2 aliens were dead, a third dying, and a 4th alien survivor seemed to be trying to communicate.
Then just suddenly he turned and he looked at me. And when that happened, all kinds of things just started happening inside my head. I started getting sensations of tumbling and falling and an awful loneliness, like there was no way he could possibly get back to where he came from.
Anderson says that within a matter of minutes, the military arrived, sealing off the area. The civilians at the site were threatened with bodily harm if they talked. Nevertheless, in the past 20 years, hundreds of witnesses have come forward, some daring to speak only on their deathbeds. Out in the New Mexico desert, there's no longer any trace of alien craft. Stanton Friedman says the story can't be covered up forever. There were simply too many witnesses.
We have testimony from over 200 people concerned with these events, people who handled the wreckage, people who described the bodies, people who had direct orders, military orders, to do this, that, or the other thing. We have consistent testimony that in a court of law would convict anybody of a crime.
Even with the overwhelming amount of testimony, the government has refused to acknowledge that either crash ever happened. None of the debris has surfaced, neither have any official documents, and most of the first-hand witnesses have died. As for the captured alien, the most often told story suggests that he lived for a few years at a military installation and then died of an unexplained illness in the early 50s.
How did we do it without space? The Vice President will serve as the Council's chair. The privatization of certain aspects is going to play a very crucial role, don't you think? They are truly into it. I will say that's not easy because everybody wants to be on this board. People that you wouldn't have believed loved what we're doing so much. They want to be some of the most successful people in the world want to be on this board. The human soul yearns for discovery. By unlocking the mysteries of the universe, we unlock truths within ourselves. That's true. Our journey into space will not only make us stronger and more prosperous, but will unite us behind grand ambitions and bring us all closer together. Wouldn't that be nice? Can you believe that space is going to do that? I thought politics would do that. Well, we'll have to rely on space instead.
There were a number of extraterrestrial vehicles out there cruising around, flying the same kind of formation we fly in our fighters. They didn't have wings, they were saucer-shaped, and we never could get as high or as fast as they were, so to really positively identify them, but they were metallic looking and saucer in shape. And they could do a few maneuvers that we couldn't do in an airplane, like just horizontally displace themselves rapidly.
If the world of 1916 was complex, or the world of 1945 was complex, the world of 2016 is intensely complex. And I can tell you that from personal experience, and I know there's many others who can tell you that as well. And you will graduate and be in that world, and you're going to be leading the soldiers and the sailors, the airmen and the Marines in that world. You'll be dealing with terrorists. You'll be dealing with hybrid armies. You'll be dealing with little green men. You're going to be dealing with tribes. You'll be dealing with national leaders and local leaders. You'll be dealing with politics and economics, and you'll be dealing with direct fire and indirect fire. And you're going to be dealing with it all. And it's all going to be dealt with simultaneously.
A lot of room out there, right? Infinity and beyond. Infinity. It could be infinity. We really don't know that, but it could be. There's got to be something, but it could be infinity, right? Okay. All right. Aliens.
Of course, we know today that galaxies extend far beyond our own galaxy. We can see all the way out to the edge of the observable universe, all the way back in time, almost to the moment of the Big Bang itself. We can see across the entire spectrum of light, revealing worlds that had previously been invisible. We see these magnificent star nurseries where nature has somehow arranged for just the right numbers and just the right sizes of stars to be born for life to arise. We see alien worlds, we see alien solar systems, 300 now and still counting, and they're not like us. We see black holes at the heart of our galaxy in the Milky Way and elsewhere in the universe where time itself seems to stand still.
These are real, not imaginary. There is a lot of material out there there's a lot of scientific material. There's a lot of junk out there about UFOs. Do look at the scientific material. There's a great deal to be learned. And let me give you one little thought. The most likely place that some of our visitors are originating from, one of two stars that are only 39 light years from here. That's just down the street. But these two sun-like stars are only an eighth of a light year apart. They're 30 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over. They're 1 billion years older than the sun. They have had plenty of time and plenty of incentive to develop means for travel between the stars. And even if they're only 500 years ahead of us, think what wondrous technology they will have.
Now, our audience would be interested in hearing your take on who these UFOs would represent. Usually the interpretation is that they come from other planets, maybe from Epsilon Eridani, some exotic star in some other part of the galaxy, and they're here to help us out. Assuming that UFOs are real, and assuming they've been seen by our top people, are they from other galaxies, other planets, or maybe it's something else?
Yeah, well, my study into this area led me to conclude that if this is technology, it's technology, nuts and bolts type technology that is something entirely different than the kind of fabricating of metals and the use of fossil fuels that we're accustomed to here on Earth. In addition to that, these things seem to behave sometimes more like living organisms, intelligent. They seem to be able to move in and out of our reality. Maybe they are 10-dimensional, maybe they are 5-dimensional, maybe they have a known science that is something that is far surpassing anything that at this point, at least in our development, we can even begin to comprehend. Yeah. But I agree that even on the secular side, secular researchers, the best of secular researchers have agreed that these things are behaving in a way that is comparable to angelology and demonology, that they seem to be a kind of intelligence that may even be at war with each other, certainly are using the human race when possible.
Not from another galaxy, but from another dimension.
From another dimension, maybe.
Now let me read what you have written here on page 1 from the transcript. Neil Armstrong reportedly mentioned seeing, quote, strange lights, end quote, on the moon, and said, "We have company," before Mission Control switched off the live feed. And then it is said that this was picked up by ham radio operators. What's there? Mission Control calling Apollo 11. Apollo 11 said, "These babies are huge, sir, enormous. You wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon watching us."
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
While Neil and Buzz were on the lunar surface, Neil switched to the medical channel and spoke directly with the chief medical officer, saying, "They're here, they're parked on the side of the crater, they're watching us."
The rocket, now we're separated from the rocket, and the rocket and the spacecraft, the lunar module and the command module, are heading toward the moon. Now we orient perpendicular to the plane of the sun, the earth, and the moon, and rotate slowly like this. And we can look out these windows and see the earth drift by and see the moon drift by.
What did you see?
And I saw a light out there, okay? This is after we had witnessed the upper stage rocket next to us make an evasive maneuver to miss the moon. Later missions, it crashed into the moon so that we could determine the seismic effect of crashing into the moon.
So you saw a light?
So we saw a light, and we thought, Wonder what that is. You know, there are a lot of lights out there when you're not looking in the direction of the sun. There are a lot of stars, and they're all fixed relative to each other. Now, one of them starts moving, or it's moving, and we know that that's another object. It's not a star.
Stars don't move.
How long well, they move, but they're so damn far away that we're not going to
hold on. How long did it follow you?
Exactly. That's why I started to do this. Now, we know that if we were to say, Houston, we got a light out the window, it's going along with us, heading for the moon, a lot of these guys are going to go ape, you know, and it's really going to endanger the mission and occupy a lot of our time trying to explain what's going on.
All right.
So we very shrewdly, Neil said, Houston, where is the upper stage? And they didn't know right away, but they said, we'll check with the guys in the back room. The guys in the back room in 10 minutes came back and said it's 6,000 miles away. Oops. Well, we figured that's not what we're looking at.
Habitation on the moon. We can visit other people with their habitation. We can keep track. If there's something very important to be developed from the moon, I'm not sure what it is right now. And I sure think we should identify what it is for America to make such gross expenditures again for human habitation on the moon. We can help. We can join with. Together, we can explore the moon and develop the moon. We should go boldly where man has not gone before. Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, who put that there? Who put that there? Well, the universe put it there. If you choose, God put it there.
Looks like maybe a crude construction device by some creatures who practiced on Phobos and then landed in Egypt and built the pyramids. I don't really believe that, but some people are liable to think that. And we just might find indications of a very crude form of life that might have arisen at Mars and then been transported to Earth. So it might be the beginnings of life on Earth that thrived, whereas it died out on Mars.
I began to study more about the pyramids and about how it came to be built. They were built by aliens, not human beings, because in those days they were living with aliens. They knew how you can work with them. They are in a different world.
There is a strong mindset by the people in charge of the Mars exploration program that we don't, we are certain that the idea of artifacts on other planets and moons is such a long shot as not to be scientifically worth considering, and that the standards of the public and some of the scientists investigating these are too low, and they're seeing the kinds of faces everybody sees in clouds and mountains, and they do not spend their valuable time looking at the reports, looking at the work of the researchers, reading their papers. They just ridicule. It's unfortunate, it's unscientific behavior, but that is the stance they have adopted as a response to all of this material. The odds against a natural origin are now 1,000 billion to 1, and that's good enough for me. So I'm concluding in simple layman's language, it's artificial beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't know the motives of the builders or the intelligent species that we now think once inhabited Mars, but the fact that they are showing things so frequently familiar to us, so terrestrial in nature, suggests that this was not part of infrastructure for an indigenous civilization, but rather it was something like what our own moon will resemble in 1,000 years from now when we have tourism visiting the place and viewing from space stations in orbit. Its artistic and museum-like quality that suggests an attempt to portray things elsewhere rather than things that are useful to the species living there.
I think it's a fascinating feature, and you're referring to the feminine face, or the king, or the queen, or whatever, the crown. It has a very interesting and restful quality, but the original face on Mars is still, I think, scientifically the most convincing, because the three-dimensional structure of the face is very face-like. And we know that now from 2 Viking pictures that were taken at different sun angles. So we were able to pair them up and get a three-dimensional structure, which makes it more like Mount Rushmore than the Old Man on the Mountain in New Hampshire, which is just a one-dimensional thing. You know, I think the important thing at this time is to establish the credibility of the investigation and to look at these objects openly and not with the kind of censorship and ridicule and cover-up that NASA has been involved in. I think NASA may be following the Brookings policy 1961, which basically said that if there's any discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence or artifacts in the solar system, that this should be kept from the public. And I think that's been happening across the board. But it's very obvious to me that through the years, the accumulated evidence for the UFO phenomenon, for the anomalies on Mars, the crop circle phenomenon, that right now there's this tremendous paradigm collision going on. There's a conflict between 2 very different points of view. And the forces that are covering this up and obfuscating and steering people away from orderly inquiry, I think is a crime against humanity.
Well, the implications would depend a lot on what that means in terms of are we alone, or how does the human species fit into this picture? And there are still 2 almost diametric possibilities there. It may turn out that this is evidence for somebody other than us, or it may turn out that this is newly discovered evidence of our own prehistory, and that there was something like the human civilization was at an advanced state on another world, and when the cataclysm came, they had to send as many members of the species as they could elsewhere, possibly to Earth, to survive, and that the human race then evolved from a new beginning from those survivors.
Well, I think the public could handle it. I think the public, I'm very much a populist. I think that people need to wake up and see that we do have energy alternatives, that we do have what looks like life out there beyond the Earth. And I think the public's ready.
A partner star to our own sun? Some say the binary model confirms all of our celestial observations without the need for excessive torque or epicycle type explanations. While the concept of a second sun challenges our present understanding of the solar system, it is hardly a new idea. Some of the earliest astronomical records refer to the existence of dual suns.
Our solar system is still terra incognita. It's full of surprises. This object is something that astronomers said shouldn't even be there. There's a whole other solar system beyond the planets that we know that are full of these things that are sort of planets, sort of comets. Some of them they call dwarf planets. That's what they're calling this one. What we're seeing is, we're seeing our neighborhood. We're seeing what's around us. And then the second part is, we're seeing where we came from.
The truth about UFOs may be painful for us to face, and this might provide a continuing rationale for the government to maintain secrecy. But the truth will and must be known eventually. Continuing our denials and fears, in my opinion, are only adding to the problem. We are all in this together. In a time of opening relationships with the Soviet Union, we have the potential for radically demilitarizing our foreign policy, reallocating those resources toward preserving our planet and opening ourselves to the global village. Part of that new reality is embracing the unknown and the possibility that we have visitors beyond the Earth or beyond our dimensions of time and space. We must enter our new openness in peace and without recrimination. Our government of the people, by the people, and for the people needs to be involved in the process, not as a hostile, separate, secret unit. I therefore advocate an orderly, non-vindictive congressional investigation of UFOs and a change in government policy on supporting research in these and other phenomena. The late philosopher Joseph Campbell once said that we are living in a time in which our ignorance and our complacency are coming to an end. It's time we let go of our fears and evolve to a higher awareness of ourselves and our place in the universe.
Aliens.
The aliens got it a lot easier than we do.
So let me understand this. This time and space describes the qualities of this object.
Yeah, to keep track of the object in a parametric space.
Oh, okay, in space and time.
Not in real space and time.
What do you mean by real space and time?
Real space and time is created at the moment that I choose the experience.